Okay, so remember back in 2016 when it felt like the whole world kind of just went sideways
Yeah.
with the UK voting to leave the EU. I mean, you all asked for a deep dive on this on Brexit, and but we're going to get into it, all the hows and whys, using some really amazing reporting from this journalist Kim Shipman. He basically like lived in Westminster during that whole thing. So yeah, we're getting the real inside story here.
Yeah, and what I think is so striking is that like this whole movement that was once seen as fringe, it totally went mainstream. And what's so cool about Tim Shipman's work is that he gives us this like fly on the wall view
Yeah.
of how, how that long-held Euroscepticism, when it got mixed with this wave of like economic anxiety, it basically created the perfect storm.
Yeah, it's totally like watching this slow burning fuse finally reach the dynamite. You had these paleo skeptics, that's what Shipman calls them, Deus Raga, who had all these like strong opinions about Europe going all the way back to Thatcher and the Maastricht Treaty.
Oh yeah, definitely. Those were definitely key turning points. I mean, really fueled the fire, so to speak. But then you have figures like Nigel Farage and UKIP. They're the ones who really brought all those concerns out of the shadows and, into like the daily news. They tapped into this growing unease about how much influence the EU really had.
Yeah, and then it's like someone drops a match into a powder keg. David Cameron, he announces the referendum, taking this issue that's been bubbling under the surface for decades and throwing it onto this like national stage.
Yeah. And Cameron's decision, I mean, it was a total gamble, right? I mean, he was facing all this pressure from within his own party. And I don't know, maybe he kind of underestimated just how strongly the public felt about this.
Yeah, it's like a textbook example of how political maneuvering can backfire in like the most spectacular way.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was riding this wave of confidence after winning the 2015 election that was so unexpected. So maybe that overconfidence played a role. Maybe he thought he could control how this was going to play out. But it was like this force that was already building.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is where the whole human element comes in. Cameron and his team, I mean, so many people in positions of power, they just totally misjudged how deep this anxiety was that people were feeling after 2008, the financial crisis and all that. And then, all the perceived consequences of globalization.
Right. They were so focused on these economic arguments, like warning people that housing prices were going to plummet if Britain left. But like Shipman points out, that kind of messaging just didn't land. With people in places like, I don't know, Doncaster or the Tees Valley, these were communities that already felt left behind.
Exactly. And it's this crucial reminder that, like, political messaging, it has to connect with what people are actually experiencing. The Remain campaign totally failed to grasp that. They were appealing to logic when people were feeling this in their gut.
Yeah, and on that note, let's talk about the campaign itself,
Yeah.
the Leave side. With figures like Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, they really knew how to tap into that sense of being like overlooked and unheard.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. They used what Shipman calls the Waterloo strategy. It was this really late surge in digital campaigning, and it was all about targeting those undecided voters, like right at the last minute. Super risky, but it obviously worked.
It's crazy how the tables turned. Cameron, this seasoned politician, calls a referendum thinking it's going to strengthen Britain's place in the EU, and then boom, it triggers his own downfall. And this whole political earthquake that no one saw coming.
It just shows you how even the most like experienced politicians can underestimate the power of social and economic forces. It's like watching a movie where the main character, they accidentally set off the crisis they were trying to prevent.
And then, as all the dust settles from this political explosion, we have Theresa May, a Remainer herself, stepping in to lead this deeply divided nation through Brexit. What a challenge to inherit.
Talk about an impossible task. I mean, she had to appease all the Brexiteers, so she starts out with this hardline stance, but then that just boxes her in, and it limits her ability to negotiate, to compromise. It was a tightrope walk from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's like she was handed this script she never wanted to perform, trying to please this audience that didn't even see her as one of their own. And that lack of flexibility really seemed to hurt her in the long run.
Well, totally. That initial hard line, it made her look so inflexible. And that made it almost impossible to bridge the divides. I mean, in Parliament and with the EU negotiators, it's like, it's a reminder that in politics, you need that balance of conviction and the ability to, like, adapt.
Right. And amidst all this political wrangling, we can't forget about the human cost of all this. Shipman really captures how much pressure everyone was under, the personal stakes. This wasn't just some game. It was impacting people's lives.
Yeah, the polarization was crazy. I mean, political disagreements were like breaking up friendships, families, communities, the constant uncertainty, the upheaval. It took a toll on everyone, and Shipman really shows that.
Even Shipman himself,
Yeah.
with all his access, to these private conversations,
Yeah.
leaked documents. He admits it was so hard to put together like a definitive account of what happened.
Right, because memories are unreliable. Perspectives are different, and even the most detailed records don't always give you the full picture.
Yeah, it's like history. It's not just this neat timeline.
Right, it's so much more complex than that. It's like this tapestry woven from everyone's individual experiences, motivations, and oftentimes conflicting interpretations of what actually happened. And that's what makes Shipman's work so important. He goes beyond just the headlines, he shows the human drama that was unfolding in the middle of all this chaos.
And one of the things that really sticks out is the impact of leadership, or sometimes the lack of it. You have May's like reserved style, totally different from Boris Johnson, with all his charisma, his way of connecting with voters, even when his vision for Brexit wasn't all that clear.
Yeah, and I think that contrast shows you something super important about leadership, especially during a crisis. Being able to communicate clearly, articulating a vision, even when there's so much uncertainty, inspiring confidence, that can make all the difference. It's not just about policy. It's about connecting with people on like a deeper level.
All right, it's like you're the captain of a ship in a storm. You want someone who's calm, who has a plan, not someone who's just running around panicking.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most interesting what-ifs of this whole thing. What if Michael Gove hadn't challenged Boris Johnson for leadership back in 2016? Would Brexit have gone differently?
That's a good one. Could Gove have actually pulled it off?
I mean, who knows? It's impossible to say for sure, but it's worth thinking about. I mean, Gove was a strong Brexiteer, for sure. But maybe he was seen as more, I don't know, intellectually rigorous, less prone to, like, Johnson's populism.
So maybe Brexit would have been smoother, more predictable.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe Gove could have built a wider consensus, both in Parliament and with the EU. Maybe he could have avoided some of the more dramatic clashes that happened with May and Johnson.
It's crazy how these seemingly small decisions can have such huge ripple effects.
It's that butterfly effect thing. It's fascinating, but also kind of unsettling. When you study history, I mean, we can analyze all these choices, these turning points, but we'll never really know what might have happened.
It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books. Every choice leads you somewhere different, but you can only experience one path.
Yeah, and that idea of like alternate realities becomes even stronger when you factor in the 24-hour news cycle. Social media, all that constant scrutiny, the pressure to react instantly. It creates an environment where decisions are often made so quickly, driven by how things look, not by strategy.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle while you're on a roller coaster.
Exactly. And that kind of environment, it's especially difficult for someone like Theresa May, who, as Shipman says, wasn't really a natural at playing the media game.
Right. She was much more comfortable with substance than style.
Yeah, I mean, in a world that's all about sound bites and viral moments, that can be a real disadvantage.
So it's like Brexit was this clash between two different leadership styles. May's more traditional reserved approach versus Johnson's more flamboyant, media-savvy style.
Yeah, and I think that reflects this bigger tension we're seeing in politics everywhere. This struggle between substance and spectacle, reason and emotion, stability and disruption. And Brexit, I mean, it's this perfect case study.
It makes you wonder if there's a way to like bridge that gap, to find a way to lead that works in this crazy world without losing your integrity or getting swept up in the 24/7 news cycle. Can you lead with substance A&D style?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's something that leaders everywhere are wrestling with. I think Brexit shows us that navigating complex issues, it takes more than just strong opinions. It demands real leadership, thoughtful communication, and maybe most importantly, a willingness to find common ground.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can present all the facts and figures, lay out these logical arguments, but in the end, people are driven by their emotions, the stories they hear, leaders who connect with their gut.
And that's why Brexit became so much bigger than just like a political event. It was about all these anxieties about identity, belonging, this feeling like you're not in control when the world's changing so fast.
Right. It wasn't just chobby about leaving the EU. It was about rejecting a system that a lot of people felt wasn't working for them anymore. This whole pushback against the elite.
Exactly. It was like this cry to be heard, to shape your own future. And I think that feeling, that desire for control, when everything feels so chaotic, it goes way beyond the UK. A lot of people can relate to that.
So Brexit happened. The UK is on its own path now.
Yeah.
But the effects are still rippling out. What can we, like, as citizens trying to make sense of it all, what can we learn from this?
I think one of the biggest takeaways from Brexit is that even systems that seem really stable, they can be totally disrupted. especially when people's worries and concerns are ignored. It shows how important it is to have these open, honest conversations, to listen to those who feel like they've been left behind, and to address the root causes of these problems before they explode.
And it also underlines the importance of leadership, right? The choices that leaders make, the way they communicate, their values, it all has a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely. Brexit shows us that we need leaders who can build bridges, leaders who can paint a picture of a positive future, leaders who can inspire confidence, especially when things are tough. It's about bringing people together.
That's a tough job,
Hmm.
but it seems more important than ever. So how do we find these leaders? Or how do we become them?
That's the question we should all be asking. Brexit is a wake-up call. We can't just sit back and watch. We need to be involved in shaping the future we want.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive. We went from the rise of Euroscepticism to that crazy campaign,
Yeah.
all the political maneuvering, and the human side of what happened.
Yeah, we saw how decisions that seem small can actually change the course of history. And in the end, Brexit was so much more than just leaving the EU. It was a symptom of a world trying to deal with change and uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a story that's still being written. And as we move forward, it's important to remember what we've learned from Brexit, to stay informed, to keep having these conversations, and to demand better leadership.
If you want to learn more about all this, Tim Shipman's books are amazing. They give you this inside look at how power works.
And remember, the deep dive doesn't end here. Keep those questions coming. Keep exploring. And most importantly, stay curious. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, keep learning.